So let me talk about the property tax distribution for the city of Worthington. So this is within the actual city proper. Within the city, 62% in 2008 of the property taxes went to the Worthington School District. So again, this is the association that the property taxes are what help fund the schools and make the schools able to do all the things that they do for our kids in our community and the property values. You can see that 5% of the property taxes went to the Worthington Library. 1% went to Columbus Zoos and Aquarium, 1% went to the Metro Parks, Franklin County Metro Parks, and 22% went to all the Franklin County kinds of things, including the general fund, but like the Adam Board, MRDD, senior living assistance. Those are all things that are also important. So that's another big piece of this pie. Only 8% of the property taxes actually go to the city of Worthington. So again, we're talking about the services provided to the city of Worthington. While 8% is still important, it's not the big pie that Worthington relies on. Worthington relies on the income taxes. So in summary of this little piece, the thing to think about is if we are decision makers trying to decide on rezoning land or trying to decide on redeveloping land. In the case of Worthington, we're landlocked, so really our options are there's only a few vacant parcels that are going to be developed yet, and then the rest of it, any kind of new stuff that happens in our community, is going to have to be a redevelopment. So when we think about what we want to encourage in terms of redevelopment or reinvestment in our community, we should be thinking about, well, what's the impact? Obviously, we want to have strong neighborhoods. Obviously, we want to have great amenities, and we want to have places to shop. But we need to be thinking about the fiscal impacts of what we want to see built and improved and how that helps balance out city resources, because the things that we expect to be provided by a city can only be provided if the city has that revenue. And so if we're not providing enough income tax, particularly to the city of Worthington, then they either need to cut services or they need to raise the rates on these different various taxes. So that's an important thing to understand. And just to clarify a point again, on the income taxes you pay where you work. So for those of us that live in Worthington but work in another city, we're paying our income taxes to that other city. It's people that are living in other places but working in Worthington, they're paying a majority of the income taxes in our city. And then there's also a subset of people that are working in townships that don't have income taxes, and in that case they actually are paying income tax to the city of Worthington even though they're not working in Worthington, but that's a little subset. This is a really important graph. I think this kind of brings it home. There are companies that do consulting for cities around the country, and they look at revenue streams and how to help streamline government and balance revenues and responsibilities and service provision. One of the things they do is they track all the money that comes in to a city across a year and all the places that a city spends money. And one of the things they can do when they're tracking every dollar is they can weight it by or track it by where it comes from a different land use within the city. So they can actually assign values. How much money is a land use bringing into a community and how much is a land use requiring in services going out. And when you make charts based on this one aspect, things become very interesting and clearer, and it's important to understand. These are two examples of cities that have paid to have this done. The top graph is the city of Stowe in Ohio. The bottom graph is closer to home here. It's the city of Dublin in Ohio. And I will start with Dublin. Dublin, there's this red line across the graph. This is the break-even point. Anything below that red line, the land use is requiring more dollars each year in terms of the services that they require than they're bringing in terms of the revenues to the city. And those land uses above the red line are bringing in more revenue to the city, in this case Dublin, than they are requiring in services provided by the city. And I'm going to start with the most interesting piece, the part that probably most people don't understand, which is the far right piece. It's this bar right here, and you can see the same thing's going on in Stowe. Red is they cost more than they bring in, and blue is they provide more than they cost. So these are the net fiscal impacts of land use. This far right graph, our bar on both sides, is retail. And I think that's something probably most people don't understand. So retail, we're talking about all kinds of retail, restaurants, shops that sell things, grocery stores, hardware stores, all those kinds of categories fall into retail. Those uses actually are a net drain on a city in the state of Ohio in general. So in Dublin and in Stowe, they're spending more money. In Dublin, it was, when this was done, I think it was back in 2000, something like that, $772 annually per retail 1,000 square feet, more in service provision to those uses than they were getting in terms of the revenue. And if you stop and think about it, going back to what I was saying before, it makes some sense. Retail uses are generally large land users that have a number of people working for them, but they're usually very low salary people. So again, making that equation between income tax and city, the fact that they have low paid jobs means that the city's not getting as much income tax revenue from that land use. Therefore, imagine all the ambulance runs, fire runs, police runs, the water and sewer service, the garbage pickup, all that kind of stuff that happens at a retail use, and some of it's privately paid for, is much greater by the amount of square feet than the amount of revenue they're coming in. So the point here is getting a retail user, a city should be picking and choosing and saying, yes, this is a use we really want. This retail use is something that really adds to our city. If it's not really adding to our city, if it's not really developing a great site that's additive to the community, it's not a win from a fiscal point of view. So from a fiscal point of view, you would say, all right, we're kind of done with retail. And again, we need to have retail. Every community needs to have a healthy retail core. But the point is, we should be making sure that they are the right retail and they're additive to our community to be having them come in and rezone land or approve new development. The next bar in, the second one from the right-hand side, is office. And you can see office is the big win. And that's, again, goes back to because offices are concentrated areas that have a lot of people that are highly paid. And so the income tax that a city receives from the office use far outweighs the amount of services that that office use requires. And so this is the reason why you see communities fighting over each other to try to lure the next office into town. That's why economic development directors are so, their big win is they can figure out how to get an office into town. The next one over, also a big win, is industrial uses. And again, even if there's not a lot of employees, and even if it's a very large site, still the amount of services they require from the city are much lower than the amount of income taxes they receive from the people working there. So again, in general, these are generalized categories. Obviously, we could break it down into more finite groups, but in general, industrial uses are a positive use for a community. So that's another reason you're looking for the next manufacturer or the next industry. It's also important to the city. Then everything over from that point over to our left is residential of different densities. But the thing I'd like to point out to you is the one on the left-hand side is single-family homes, which most communities have the most of. And you can see in Dublin, a single-family, in fact, all residential uses in Dublin, but a single-family home in particular, takes more service than it provides in revenue. And that's another important thing for people to understand. I think some people have the misunderstood impression from a fiscal point of view that a subdivision of single-family homes is a win for a community. From a fiscal point of view, it's not. They cost more for the amount of services they're providing than they bring in terms of revenue. And again, it comes back in large part to income tax. So turning a field into a bunch of houses is probably not, from a fiscal point of view, a win for a community. Obviously, neighborhoods are very important to the success. We aren't a community without people living there. But we got to understand the trade-offs we're making. The more houses we add, the more of a fiscal impact on a negative side of the balance sheet we're making for a community. As the densities increase, depends on the kind of development and the amount of density. In the case of Stowe, there's some pretty big negative impacts. This is multifamily rental. This one is condo, so you can see the differences of the impacts. In Dublin, it's really just about density. And in Dublin, as you see, the densities are going up. This is 12 units per acre. You're getting closer and closer to zero. So that point is, if you get a nice development, but you do it at a higher density, more people are in an area, and there's actually less services. The amount of infrastructure that needs to be extended, water and sewer lines, the amount of stops you have to do in one place are actually less because you've got a more concentrated area, and you're not maintaining things like sidewalks, miles of sidewalks for one high density unit. So these are important things to understand and think about. But like most people don't understand this, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk today was to present this information. And then this is not directly related to Worthington, but for those of you that might live in the township, townships aren't able to have income taxes except in our very special situations in the state of Ohio. So because they don't have income taxes, the ratios are a little different. And this graph is actually the other way around. This is a dollar break-even point. If you're below it, the township's making money. If you're above it, the township's losing money. And the one thing I want to point out is the working agricultural farmland is actually a boon for a township, and the residential development is actually a loss for the township. And again, that's because of the amount of services that residential requires. So I've done a lot of work both in cities and in counties and townships, and it's always interesting to me that in townships people often think, oh, the development of that 1,000-acre farm into a subdivision, how nice, we get rid of the smells of the animals and the tractors and all that kind of stuff. It's a big win for the township, when actually, if you're looking from a fiscal point of view, you've just added a huge drain on the fiscal resources of the township. So these are important things to understand.